I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we focus on things nationally as opposed to things that just are driven state by state. I mean, we are a nation. The industry is a national industry today in comparison to what it might have been 30 years ago or even 100 years ago when we created what we've got now. We have to have a strategy which is going to make sure that we can deliver efficiently right throughout the country. And infrastructure, it's no point in having infrastructure strategy for New South Wales and a different one for Victoria and a different one yet again for Queensland. I mean, what's the point? Infrastructure has to work together so that we get the supply chain efficient right across those 3 places or 4 places or 5. So I think it's absolutely critical that it be national, and it's absolutely critical that all levels of government, and that includes local government as well, works together to make sure that that national strategy is implemented.
The freight and supply chains, there are many different types of freight and supply chains, and they have multiple stakeholders throughout different parts, and they range from managers, infrastructure providers, operators and government at all levels. And because you've got such a diversity of players, there does need to be a common purpose and a common direction and a shared direction in that sense. So you do need to have strategies that people can identify as being opportunities in the future for investment purposes. They need to know what's going to happen to their businesses. They need to be able to invest for the purpose of their businesses. People need to be able to make those investment decisions knowing what the future holds and how they're going to form part of that. So having a strategy at a national level is really important to identify what are those requirements. It's also important because I think there's a lack of understanding about the freight industry outside of the freight industry. And when you get a strategy at a national level, you start to engage outside of the freight industry, and you start to get acknowledgement and recognition. So having a strategy at a national level is critical to also ensure that it is embodied and supported at a state level, and then it gets filtered down to a local level. But you do need the connectivity through all levels of government, but the strategy also needs to be supported by industry, because if it's not supported by industry, then it doesn't become a sustainable strategy.
I think historically we've had state governments and the Commonwealth government effectively doing their own activities, and we haven't had a national freight strategy linking both the Commonwealth government and the state governments, and I think that's the utmost importance today. Freight's becoming a more important part of our road networks, our rail networks, and the coordination from the Commonwealth level down through the states is essential for planning, for future infrastructure, for unblocking our bottlenecks, and essentially our economy is dependent on freight. Our economy depends on freight moving efficiently to our ports, and our international competitiveness for our exporters is dependent on those supply chains. And so I'd encourage the Commonwealth Government to facilitate a freight division linking directly with the states and Infrastructure Australia to examine all of the priority projects and coordinate that planning and implementation of infrastructure nationally.
Look, planning is critical. I mean, ARTC operates the interstate freight network connecting all the capital cities, and look, we understand how important it is to plan. But it's more important when you think about supply chains and the fact that various pieces of infrastructure need to be connected together, whether it's by road or by rail or by sea. It's so critical to take long-term decisions around planning, and particularly around land reservation and transport corridors. So look, planning is critical, and it needs to be done to a far greater extent, and it needs to look at total supply chains, not just look at particular modes of transport or particular pieces of infrastructure. It really needs to look at that integrated network of roads, rail systems, warehouse precincts and ports. And I think the states are beginning to understand the importance of that, and the Commonwealth and state governments, and I think it's important to work with industry to make sure that all happens.
I think a national freight and supply chain strategy is critical for Australia because we have too many examples over time, and even now, where we spend a lot of time and energy looking at different objectives state by state, And state by state priorities are not necessarily the same as national priorities. And I think we've got a long history, particularly in the rail industry, where at times we've made poor decisions looking at a part of the chain rather than contemplating the entire chain and what the best solution is for the country.